Happy Thanksgiving and happy Selection Sunday. As always, he's Mick. I'm Daniel. This is Six Rotations, and we love checking in with you late on this Sunday evening as we wrap up the month of November, breaking down a glorious bracket. And Mick, we've got our 64 teams. It would be remiss to not at least give a nod to how incredible the week was before Selection Sunday came with an awesome SEC championship reverse sweep. Kentucky takes down Texas. That was an unbelievable amount of fun to watch and enjoy. Nebraska put together a clinic of a finish to the year. They only dropped 7 sets, one in conference play all season. Pittsburgh and Stanford co-ACC champions. Then you got some wild finishes like St. Thomas dancing for the first time in their program's history with the upset win over South Dakota State. But Mick, we can talk about it all as we break down the quadrants. We've got a lot to jam in. As always, we're brought to you by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. And Mick, we like to look at the kind of the whole bracket, and we usually dive right into the quadrants. But I want to get an idea from you as we look at the entire bracket here. Is there a certain area that you feel has weaker path for the number one spot? And is there a death quadrant that you can kind of spot out here early?
No, I think like we said before, when it gets down to 16, that's really where you could lose any night. And I thought the committee's job was to make sure that when you got to 16, that we had the strongest 16 there. I think they've done a pretty good job with that. I don't see any real weak ways through. In fact, your first look, you think Nebraska's got a weak way through, but then if they win first and second round like they should, they're going to face off against Miami in the first round of the regionals, and Miami's got to get by Kansas. And so, I mean, I think this is a pretty good job. I think 4 teams out of the Big East is interesting. First time Big East has had 4 teams. I think only 5 teams out of the SEC lends me to think this way. We have 2 top seeds in Kentucky and Texas, both from the SEC, but they only get 5 teams out of their conference, 3 other teams, and they're good ones, no doubt. But does that discount their effectiveness this year because they aren't playing as tough of teams? And we thought the Big Ten was down, and yet they get 9 teams, and so that's a little hard to understand there. Because we watched those teams and some of them were trending down. Some were trending up, but some were trending down. And then we didn't see much credit going to USC, and yet they've got a pretty good chance to get into the regionals. They have to get by BYU with that sort of thing. But I think overall, when you get by the first round, and there are some interesting first round games also. But when you get by the first round, then you start to have some pretty good games to watch.
Well, I will quickly correct you there. Only 3 teams from the Big East, because the ultimate snub was the 37th in the RPI, Villanova. And I will say, I
Oh,
kind of went to
that's
bat the last few days over text with people. I did not think Villanova deserved to be in. I thought the Big East did a lot of RPI trickery to make it look like Villanova had a good resume. But then when you broke it down, they didn't beat any of the good teams in the conference, but they just didn't have any horrible losses. And so they went ahead and gave a team like North Carolina, who had, 49 RPI. They were one of the last teams in. Another RPI snub was Pepperdine at 43, and then your 2 Sun Belt teams at 44 and 46. Those were our snubs. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the ifs, ands, or buts. Let's kind of enjoy who made it. I will say personally, Mick, I am happy how certain things wound up. But with that, I want to break down this Nebraska quadrant because you mentioned it. 9 Big Ten teams, 6 of them hosting. So that was the big, I guess, message from the committee early on. Miami, not a host. Indiana, USC, Minnesota all worked their way in to host spots, and Miami's top 25 losses not good enough to make up for the fact that they didn't have really any bad losses. I wasn't really on track with Kansas hosting over Miami here as we look at this first quadrant and Nebraska. And the first thing that pops out, Mick, is a potential Danny Busboom Kelly against Louisville in the regional finals. That has potential to be electric. But you mentioned Miami is a team that can beat anybody. The question is, can they get through a trip to freezing cold Lawrence?
Yeah, that is a thing about playing in Miami because you never have trouble warming up. You always get loose quick and you can play well. They did have to play up and down the East Seaboard though, and so they did have to. And if they, I don't know if they went to Syracuse this year, but I haven't ever been to Syracuse when it's warm. So it's one of those things. But they'll just have to get ready for it. I think the excitement of playing there will be enough to get them ready to play. I don't think the weather is going to be a problem in that regard. Maybe a problem getting there, but that'd be the only problem.
Yeah, let's look at a few other of the big storylines here. Kansas State, a team that we've talked about throughout the year. Shaylee Myers, one of their stars, their first tournament in 4 years, and that is one of the marquee matches because Kansas State is actually the 3 seed in that little quadrant with Nebraska, Long Island, and San Diego because the Toreros, who got a lot of love in the RPI, the automatic qualifier, they've won 18 in a row. That's one of my marquee. I marked down, I think it was 7 matches in the first round, Mick, that I thought were kind of the best matches of that opening round. I've got KSU USD as one of them. And I'll tell you what, Miami's got to get by a very tough Tulsa team who upset Rice, and they're making their first trip in over a decade. But the real curiosity came with Kansas and how we mentioned it. They kind of limped down the finish line, and they got swept by BYU and Utah 2 weeks ago. And Miami's losses are SMU, Stanford, Louisville, Indiana, and Cal. So there's no, there's one bad loss on
Yeah,
that. And,
yeah.
and and they finished very strong, but clearly not enough to get that host spot. And guess what, Mick? I don't know the record, but this feels like the first year forever that there is no host in the state of Florida.
Interesting. I didn't notice that, but I really assumed that Miami would be hosting. I just maybe we don't know. Maybe they didn't even apply to host. You just don't know until we
No.
find out.
Their
But
RPI was 19. So according to RPI, the committee kept it very tight for the top 16. The only difference was Indiana was just on the outside and UTEP, who lost their conference championship game or the semifinals, they were on the 16 spot. But Mick, let's talk more. Texas A&M and TCU on that collision course. TCU had the big 5-set win in Fort Worth in September. What are you thinking about when you see the bottom portion of this quadrant when you've got Texas A&M, Louisville, and then a team that's always dangerous in Western Kentucky? I think Louisville is a team that people are sleeping on a little bit. The Cardinals, all their losses have come to top 10 teams. It's unreal.
yeah, and many 5-set matches. They've not been
All but
swept
one.
very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if anything, if they're not tired out from all of this, and if they can relax and get back into this, they could be the team that surprises everybody. Or at least I looked at Nebraska to see if they had a clean sweep in there. I see the Miami potential being one, the next one's Louisville potential being two, and then having to play Pitt three, with Pitt going to 4 Final Fours in a row, and now they got the best team in the country to play to get there. I mean, I think that's a pretty stiff bracket that could match up for Nebraska. So they can't just breeze through. They're going to have to really be ready to play.
And I've got Western Kentucky and Marquette as one of my other top matches in the first round. So we move the page down and you talk about the Pitt quadrant. 5 straight top 4 seeds for Pitt. The 2 seed is SMU, who Pitt has already beaten twice. And I'm not sure I'm too worried here if I'm looking at this as a Pitt fan. Purdue is a team that maybe you're worried about, but Minnesota is by far, in my mind, the weakest 4 seed of all of the, Indiana, USC, Minnesota. It's a lot of the Big Ten out there in those 4 seeds. And I think we are on a collision course again for Pitt and Nebraska. Lock me in, Kansas City, December 18th.
Yeah, I would say though, for Purdue, not to look past Baylor. All at once, Baylor has brought along their young players quite slowly this year, and now they're playing and starting, and they're on upswing. They're up tempo right now as far as playing well. And Purdue can't look by them, and Baylor is going to be hungry to prove themselves. So, Purdue has had some trouble finishing at the end of the year in the tournaments lately, and this looks like one where I watched their match with Indiana, and it was give 4 points, win 6 points, give 3 points, win 7 points. I mean, there were just a lot of errors going on. I don't know if it's just the end of the season, Thanksgiving weekend, but I watched Baylor and I thought they know what they're trying to do. So I would be worried about Baylor. I don't know if TCU's gotten their moxie back. They have been limping since midseason, and yet they get matches into 4 or 5 sets. That's another one that you hope doesn't catch fire if you've got them in your bracket.
I love that point out you mentioned because if you're a Purdue fan, the first thing you think of when this announcement comes out, and Courtney and Holly did a tremendous job. Mary chimed in from time to time. Courtney Lyle is a true gem in this sport, and she's so good at this. Remember a couple years ago when it wasn't Courtney Lyle hosting the selection
Yeah,
show? And
I
that's all
do.
I'm going to say. She is really, really talented. But the first thing I noticed, and it brought back my mind because I was a commentator for Purdue, is they played Wright State in the first round of 2019. They swept them. Then they go to the regional semifinals and get manhandled by Baylor. So if that rematch comes again, of course, it'll be, you know, in a different location. It'll be at Purdue and an opportunity to get to the regionals. But, there's always those skeletons in the closet, 11th straight trip. And again, Dave Shondell is going to go to bed every night with the same words from everyone. Is this the year he can finally get to the Final Four? And that's
Yep.
the question. And they only return that one starter, and you see all their all conference players scattered across the bracket. But Mick, I am putting my attention right now. I'm putting my, you know, eggs in a basket. And I'm just going to say this: keep an eye on St. Thomas. St. Thomas, I watched them defeat South Dakota State in that Summit League final. This is a team that just moved up to Division One 4 or 5 years ago, but they have the funds. You know how there's those programs that have the funds? They had the funds when they moved up. They were just not allowed to reach the NCAA tournament for a few years, and they're taking on Iowa State, and that's just one of those. They're playing in Minnesota, right? Because Minnesota's the host. St. Thomas is in Minnesota, for those not sure, and they're called the St. Thomas Tommies. And that's the first thing I noticed there. I'm like, keep an eye on that. But let's talk about the bubble. Do you think Michigan is a team kind of deserving of this spot over some of the group of five teams? Michigan facing Xavier, who's in their first tournament since 2007.
I really didn't think Michigan deserved to be in there, but I didn't think UCLA deserved to be in there either. And so, simply because of the way they have played up and down, up and down, up and down. And I couldn't see any momentum. Now, I thought I saw more momentum out of Michigan at the end of the season than I did of UCLA. And I was really hoping that they weren't going to include Illinois, who's snuck in my opinion, the last 3 or 4 years, really at the end of the numbers. So I don't know about the Big Ten getting 9 teams. On the other hand, they have a middle of the conference group that played each other pretty hard all the time. That group of Purdue, USC, Michigan, Indiana, all of those teams were playing each other very difficultly. I mean, competing very hard against each other. Even Northwestern coming on there at the end, showing some spunk. But Illinois was trending out down, and so I think I can live with Michigan being in there because they're trying to build that program back, and they went from 7 wins to 21 wins. I think that's some of the reason to look at that. And I think always this would not be unfair not to say that the Big Ten network does so much for volleyball. It's hard to keep when a Big Ten team's on the bubble, it's hard to keep them out because of what they're doing. They were the first conference to really have a show on volleyball and have been really promoting the game at the highest level.
Yep, and Michigan, the second biggest turnaround to Campbell And I do want to give a nod. That was a really funny opening right off the bat. Nebraska's the host. Bang, Long Island. And you see the faces come up, and everyone at home is thinking, oh, they have to go to Lincoln. And at least they get a memory and an experience of playing in the Mecca of volleyball. And Mick, you talk about Michigan and the coaching turnaround and Aaron Virtue, who is a phenomenal hire a few years ago, and what she has done to go from 7 wins to the 21 wins. And 2-7 top 50 is pretty comparable to a lot of the teams that were right on the bubble. But Villanova was 1-5 against the top 50. And so that's just one of those things. Now,
Well,
before
I
we,
think three teams out of the Big East is even a big deal. Okay.
I agree. And you know
Not
what?
long,
Xavier
not even
deserved it.
four, but three is a
Yeah.
big deal, and losing Marquette lost their head coach and they have a new coach come in and Marquette's still hanging in there well. And Xavier coming on now is provided some real interesting stuff down in Cincinnati's backwoods because that city's got two teams that got teams beating up on each other again. And Wright State's just up the interstate there. And this year Dayton didn't make it, but Wright State did. So that whole area of the country is playing very good volleyball.
Yeah, last thing here, Florida against Rice could be one of those really fun matches. And then, I wanted to go through because that first quadrant had Flor Marie, it had Ifana Kazakpala, it had Kara Cressy and all of the Nebraska players. And so the superstar quadrant might be that one. I think they might have the best talent, pure players. But then the number 1 and 2 seeds, you just throw Babcock and Malaya Jones out there. And that is a really, really fun quadrant. And Mick, what I want to do for this selection episode for those of you that are watching and locked in with us, and we really appreciate all the support through all of the season. We're going to do a bigger giveaway for this upcoming tournament than most, and the first one will start next weekend. And so what we're going to do is we are going to have you guys email in sixrotations@gmail.com. Make sure to spell out six. How many of the top 16 seeds do you think will advance to the regional round? How many will get through their home 2 matches? Go ahead and send us those emails. And then I also want the correct final 4 teams. And whoever wins that, if we do have a sole winner, will get a few prizes, but we may have to split it up because there could be a tie. So those are the 2 selection episode giveaways that we're going to do today. And so with that, we keep on chugging, Mick. And so we go from the bottom left to the top right, and with it, your Texas Longhorns, who do look primed for a run. The question is, can they avoid Kentucky in the process? Because that is one of those kryptonites that's starting to manufacture. And I do think some might consider this to be the toughest quadrant. Wisconsin, the best 3 seed. Stanford, maybe the best 2 seed. I'm just not sure I see anywhere that Texas is going to lose before they get to either playing Wisconsin or Stanford.
The problem for Texas is to start thinking about that instead of looking at Penn State, for instance. And I mean when they get through if they get through their first round, and I would say Penn State probably is going to get through their first round match, it'd be real easy for Texas to want to just ho hum and try to run them out of Dodge, and they're not going. They're going to come to play, and they're going to play as hard as they can play. And you've seen Texas before when that things don't go right and their first ball kills, it's not coming. And if Penn State can disrupt that with their serving, which they've been doing lately quite well, then that might be a match that you don't want to miss because that could be good. But that's one I circled for Texas to watch out for. I think the other one I think who do you think is going to win, Colorado or Indiana?
I cannot wait, Mick. I'm so happy you brought that up because I think for our show, we have been pretty big Colorado fans this year. We've kind of enjoyed watching the climb, and we kind of called out Anna Burilovic early on. I think the home court advantage will prove to be too much, and I think Indiana will win in 5 there. But if there is to be a 5 seed that I would want to put my chips into the middle of the pile, right? Let's go through the 5 seeds here. We've got BYU and USC, 4 versus 5. That's a bit of a coin flip. You've got Miami and Kansas, and we know how much, we're fans of Miami. And then you've got Minnesota and Iowa State. I would say that Colorado would probably be the one that I would bet money would advance of those four. Again, Miami going to Kansas has trouble written all over it. I just don't feel the juju around them on the road in foreign territory. It might be snowing, maybe there's trouble to get into town. I've got to go to Kansas on Friday or Saturday for a football game. So I'm already looking at the weather and it's like -3 degrees. And it's going to be interesting. I'll be in Hutchinson, so maybe I'll pop by Lawrence. I don't know how far away it is, but I
Well,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so the only thing that gives Indiana an advantage if Colorado and Indiana hook up there is that Indiana played at Texas last year. They were in Austin, played in front of that crowd, in front of Gregory Gym. That's probably not going to be too big a deal for them to come back and play. Colorado hasn't been there.
Right.
So when you get to the point where now you've got home teams playing, they got all their fans there. It's a ruckus environment for sure. Now you have to take that into consideration also, because that wears on you, especially at the end of the season. So that might give Indiana a little bit of an advantage over Colorado, but Indiana's not going to beat Texas. So if they win that, and if Texas wins over Penn State, then I have Texas going
Yeah.
to the next round. And you did mention one other thing. I think one of the hottest teams that's being overlooked simply because they got swept by Nebraska so badly is Wisconsin. And one of the things that I always do each year, and I talk about this, but the numbers, and I went through and did the end of the season numbers, and Wisconsin is number one in points scored for all teams in the tournament. They have scored more points per set than all teams. And not only that, and Nebraska's first in differential between number of points scored and the number of points that they allow the defense to score. But Nebraska's first in that. They're first in giving up as few points as possible. But Wisconsin, number one in points scored, and that always means if you can score the ball, you have a chance to win. And all it takes is some really good serving, keep the other team out of system a little bit, helps your defense dig a few more balls. Mimi Collier goes to work, and they could be a factor here.
I agree. I had written down, I think they're the best three seed. I think this is the spunkiest quadrant because you've got UNC, the worst team in the RPI, 50 or 49 in the RPI. They got that one win over SMU. They did sweep Florida and beat Georgia Tech. But aside from that, they don't have any bad losses. And that's what it kind of came down to. Their worst loss is South Carolina on the road in 5 non-conference. And so I think that kind of aided them. I guess you could call that a bad loss, but it's not a horrific loss. And so I'm curious to see how teams like Arizona, UNC, and UTEP that are, I'll call them spunky, not expected to do much. UTEP against UNC is a really fun first round game. South Dakota State, Mick, an at-large team who won almost all their matches, but then upset by St. Thomas. They'll take on Arizona, and that is in California. So that's going to be one of those unique ones where I'm not quite sure what the Stanford crowd is going to look like and whether Arizona can make the trip. Maybe it's Utah Valley. It's not too far of a drive for them. South Dakota State, I don't imagine will have much of a home court advantage there. But I'm just curious to see, is Logan Parks healthy for Stanford? And can Texas avoid what happened last year, which was almost kind of looking ahead after, looking ahead from that Creighton match? Will they have a match with Indiana? And will that be one that can Indiana has a little bit of that Creighton in them where they're a very fundamentally sound team and they can grind you down because Texas does not necessarily match up really well with, I would say, teams that uh, are offense heavy, right? Texas has struggled with blocking. I think that's okay to say.
I really think Texas would do okay against Indiana. I think they might have more trouble against Colorado,
Okay.
simply because Colorado's got the one kid that can bring it, and you have to have that person. Mary Wise pointed out that every team in this tournament to advance has to have a superstar, somebody that will carry the team a bit. And if you look at all these teams, they all have a scorer or two scorers, And you could say Nebraska has 4 or 5 scorers, but
Yeah, they do.
it's just getting the ball to the right people at the right time. That's going to be their predicament because they're going to have to rely on Riley being so good that she feels the match. And when they get into a close match, she's going to have to go to the person that's going to get her the point.
Yep. And then you've got the SEC, who only had 5 teams in, 3 of them were hosts. Missouri kind of played their way out over the final stretch of the year. And then we move into the Kentucky quadrant. And as we talk about the Wildcats and all their weapons and Hudson and DeLay and 9 straight SEC regular season titles, I think this is the easiest of any of the 1 seeds roads. Just off of straight looking at it, I don't think Arizona State is a strong 2 seed. I don't necessarily think that Creighton is a strong 3 seed. Say the same thing about USC in the 4 and BYU in the 5. I'm just going down the seeds on this. I don't think Tennessee is a strong seed. UCLA, Georgia Tech, chaos. That's all I wrote down there, Mick. That is going to go 5 sets. You can put it in the bank. You can lock it in, Georgia Tech, UCLA. Imagine being those 2 teams watching the 35 minutes until they get their name announced, and then finally they get the gates opened up for them. That must have been stress.
Yeah, I can remember one year when we were the last team in the announced in the tournament. We weren't the last team, but we were the last one announced because of the bracket like this.
Yeah.
And that was just nerve-wracking to think, what are you guys doing? Put us up here, put us up here, you know. But it's
Yep.
it's it's really interesting, and that bracket is, yeah. I think there are some, like I said, you mentioned Tennessee, but I watched Tennessee play 3 times now in the last 2.5 weeks. They have the potential to hurt people. And if you look at their numbers, the only thing they don't have is that one player, yet the kid from Nebraska who is their big hitter, and her name slips my mind right now, but she's been the go-to both front row and back row that really leads them. Their numbers are good. They're playing good defense, they're playing smart offense, and they stay in the matches for a long period of time.
Yeah, Kubik, Hayden Kubik, right? Maddie's
Yeah,
sister, drafted in the first
yeah,
round or second round
yeah.
by PVF. She had
Kubik's,
25 kills in their loss to
yeah.
Kentucky last week. And it was a tight fourth set. The third set was a blowout. Kentucky won the fourth 25-23. I'm just going to say right now, I feel very confident that we are going to have both Kentucky and Nebraska in the Final Four. I'm not quite as confident about Texas, and I think Pitt as well. I think you can put those 3 in, and I feel pretty good about them. And then the top right is a little bit more chaotic because of how talented some of the other teams are in it. But Mick, here's a fun one for you. Georgia Tech, one of the last 4 in with North Carolina, USF, and Utah. And then the first 4 out are Villanova, Texas State, JMU, and Cincinnati. So I thought it was interesting that Pepperdine didn't quite get the shout out there. But when you look at the quadrants and to finish things off here, I thought that Utah got a really tough matchup against Northern Iowa and Bobby Peterson's squad and Jaden Peterson, the libero, Peyton's sister, twin sister, and 21 straight wins for UNI. I think they are going to take care of Utah, but Utah's always so good in the first round. So I,
Well,
I, I can't quite throw that in there as much. And then I think that Tennessee, Utah State's an at-large bid, and they had a really, really good season in the Mountain West.
I think Utah is back. I think they're trending up. I think they've got renewed energy. I think they're healthy again. I would not want to be Northern Iowa playing Utah,
And I'll
honestly.
I'll correct myself. They would have been an at-large, but they did win the Mountain West in a sweep over Colorado State. But then, how about this, Mick? I show up at Cal Poly. They make 3 straight NCAA tournaments. I'm the broadcaster there for 3 years. They don't make the NCAA tournament, and then I leave. And the first, I guess the second season, they go and they make the tournament for the first time since 2019. I don't necessarily think that BYU will struggle, but if there is a good matchup for Cal Poly, it is a team like BYU who, if they're not home, do not look as good as they are when they are home. So they're going to be out in LA, which may be advantage to the Mustangs in that one. And that kind of wraps up the vague look at the bracket. And, we had some people asking if we were going to do a deeper dive into the bracket, and we'll consider it maybe. I know we did the Patreon last year where you can kind of subscribe for some exclusive episodes throughout the tournament. So we'll try to gauge some interest on those fronts. But make sure to email us with your final four teams and how many of the 16 seeds you think will reach the regionals.
And let me throw one other one at you that we didn't talk about, but let's say A&M wins out until they get to Nebraska. They run such a fast offense that Nebraska has not played this offense by any of their opposition this year. And when they get hot, they have they have a presence in the middle blocking. They have a scorer on the right side in Lednicki. They have a good left side, two good left sides actually. And they went right down to the wire against, was it Wisconsin in the finals of the regional last year?
Yes, that was a
Um,
fun one, right?
that was a fun match, and they've got experience. And guess what? They've got eight of those kids back. Eight
But
of those kids back.
I'll push up against this because I just quickly skimmed through Texas A&M's schedule this season, and the only tough true road match they had was at SMU. They avoided playing at Texas. They didn't have to play at anyone else that was kind of a ruckus environment, right? They didn't play at Kentucky, and they got swept at SMU. So that would be the only question. Can Texas A&M go to Devaney? And listen, I know what we're going to get here, right? We're going to get Nebraska fans in the comments wondering why we're not talking about how they're the greatest team of all time and why we're not breaking down the historic numbers. And yeah, Andy Jackson broke the regular season Big Ten record. But we know this. We all know how good they are. It's a little bit I guess, time wasting to dive in and just say, well, they're amazing at this position and they're amazing at this position. We can just fast forward 2 weeks and then we can do a deep dive on them when they have a match that warrants it. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, I'm going to go to bat. I think Nebraska will not have trouble at home against anyone in this bracket. I just don't think going Louisville, right? That's the thing. Louisville at Nebraska. That's when we'll dive in with our deep dive. That's when things will get a little bit more fun.
Well, that's a lot of red.
It's a lot of red. It's a lot of Danny Busboom Kelly. I'm just telling you right now, these are my five setters. You could lock them in. Utah, UNI, Georgia Tech, UCLA, Western Kentucky, Marquette, and Kansas State, USD. I'm just going to put those out there on the table. Those are going to go five. You can go ahead and find the schedule now on ESPN. It starts at 3 o'clock Eastern on Thursday. American versus Colorado. And then at 4:30, there's that UCLA Georgia Tech five-setter for you. Bang, right off the bat. North Carolina, UTEP at 5:30, Tulsa, Miami at 5. And, I wish we had noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon matches on Thursday, but we just don't, unfortunately. And then it starts at 4 o'clock on Friday with Michigan, Xavier, and Marquette, Western Kentucky.
And these are back to back this week. The first round, second round are back to back. There's not a day in between.
Right, right. You go Thursday, Friday, or you go Friday, Saturday.
Yes.
That's I don't know. I would have to ask a little bit more around to see what the preferences are. If you just want to go bang bang, or if you want to have that day off. I'm curious. We'll get some ideas from some coaches. But Mick, let's quickly go through our team of the week here, just to keep the flow going and keep the team of the week alive, because you guys can still email us throughout the postseason with your team of the week. We'll try to get an idea. If we don't get any emails, we probably won't do a team of the week for the postseason. If we get some emails, anyone who has not won can still apply and win. So let us know. But I got a little creative with this one, Mick. I had some fun here. I went out to start my team of the week at UNI, Northern Iowa. The conference player of the year, Cassidy Hartman, who had 23 kills and hit 600 in the win over Drake on Tuesday.
Well, I'm boring. I'm going National Player of the Year, and those are my group. So,
Who's your national player of the year?
one of these probably.
Okay. I went a little chalky. Who are your outside hitters? Hit me.
I have Hudson from Kentucky, and I have Stafford from Texas.
Nice. I have Hudson as well. So I think Hudson with her 25 kills hit 300. Stafford was tremendous, right? What'd she have? 30, 28 kills, something like that.
Yeah, I mean they're relying on her more and more and more, like the other teams do. They're big hitters now, and it's probably good that Texas didn't do that early in the year, but that they're having to rely on her now, and she's stepped up. Plus, her middle back defense is exceptional, and her passing's been really good. So I like her as one of those 4 or 5 left sides that are really playing tremendous volleyball this year. This has been the most fun for outside hitters in a long time.
It has been. This is going to be a great couple weeks, everyone. I cannot wait. I went Lizzie Carr in the middle, 13 kills, 1 error for Kentucky. And how about another Purdue transfer, right? We're just going to go through all the Purdue transfers here. And Reese Pacheck for Kansas. She had 16 points, hit 400 in their win over Iowa State. Maybe the win that got Kansas into a hosting spot there. Those are my middles.
Yeah, and she had a good match, there's no question. But I went with Andy Jackson from Nebraska and Cressy from Louisville. I just think if Cressy had a elite setter that she would really shine even more than she does right now. She does so many good things and has to be the point on the defense at the net and still score. And then they left her in the back row also to serve and so she's really playing quite a bit of volleyball and playing quite well for Louisville, and they need every bit of her.
And remember, they didn't play this year, Louisville and Nebraska. So we might get our first, matchup of the year between Cressy and Andy Jackson. That would be a lot of fun. Maybe did they play pre-conference last year? I'm trying to remember, but I went chalk on the right side. Olivia Babcock, so dang good. She hit 400, almost single-handedly swept Louisville herself, and she's my opposite of the week.
Ditto.
All right. What about setter? I went out to the Tommies because I watched that match in the win over the Jackrabbits, and Morgan Keeley, their setter, is my setter of the week. 41 assists, 4 kills. I love an aggressive setter, and she was dumping early and often.
Well, I went with Riley at Nebraska. I haven't talked about her much this year because she's been so good, and I was looking at other people and that sort of thing. But we're getting down to the end of the year, and these are the people that are going to run the show and make things go. And she's one you got to keep your eyes on.
And who's your libero?
Holter from Texas. I still think, and there are about 6 liberos right now that I would like to bring out, but Holter does not only the passing, the defense, but the leadership part is exceptional, I think, and how she runs the show for Texas, and they actually have gravitated to her. Even Stafford lets her run the huddle and that sort of thing. I'm kind of a Holter fan right now, so I'll go with Holter.
I can't wait. I went with the MVP of the SEC title match in Molly Tuozo.
Yeah,
25 digs in the semis, 8 assists, had 16 digs, 2 aces
sure.
against Texas. We've got our bracket. You have it as well. Cannot wait to break down our first 2 rounds with you next week. Until then, enjoy all the action. He's Mick. I'm Daniel, and this is Six Rotations.